Hello, everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, a freelance writer on Access.com, Billboard. Oh my gosh, Goldmine. I'm Variety. I'm everywhere. Anyway, welcoming you to another Things We Said Today, where we talk about what's happening in the world of the Beatles, both past, present, and maybe to come. And in fact, we will be talking about maybe to come today. Let me introduce the two people that will be talking about all these fun things with me. First, from the great state of Connecticut, he hosts the weekly Beatles show, Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Ken, hello.
Hey, Steve. How you doing? Hi, everybody.
And from the great state of Maine, almost almost past the border north, the author of The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop. Got that something, how the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, changed everything. I'll get that right. Who for years was the man at the Beatles desk at the New York Times. We love that because he was also the classical music writer at the same time. He now writes for the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Alan Cosin. Hello, Alan.
Hey, Steve. Hello, everyone.
Was that a long enough introduction? Today we're going to talk mainly about the Sgt. Pepper box set, but we got a couple of news items to talk about first. And let's start with the thing that apparently has been really getting a lot of buzz on Facebook is the debut of the Beatles Channel on Sirius XM. It debuted last week. It started with Ringo and Paul doing audio clips, and they've been playing basically everything associated with the Beatles, and that includes Beatle tracks, Beatle covers, little Beatle audio clips. There's also some special shows. Among them, Peter Asher has a show that's going to link Peter and Gordon and the Beatles, and he's also going to talk about his stories about knowing the Beatles for years. And it has a great version of From Me to You, which I heard that on the promo the other day. You guys want to talk about the channel at all?
Well, obviously, I've known for quite a while that Sirius XM has wanted to get an all Beatles channel. And in order to do that, you need permission from all four parties at Apple. And not only that, I'm sure that it must cost them a pretty penny to do that. In order to have a channel devoted to one artist being a solo artist or a group, you either have to have permission from that artist, or if the artist is deceased, from the family, the survivors of the family, or in this case, you got to have permission from Paul, Ringo, Yoko, and Olivia. So it's taken quite a while for this to happen, so I'm very happy that Sirius finally managed to pull this off. I'm sure it wasn't easy for many years for them to do that. And you've noticed that through the years they've had channels devoted to other artists, and whether it's Willie Nelson or Bruce Springsteen, which usually with Bruce I think it's just for a short time when he has a new album out. You know, you need permission from the artist to do that. So I would imagine that it's been a tough hurdle to get there, to have an all-Beatle channel. And I'm glad you mentioned Peter Asher because, you know, apart from the fact that he has the history with Peter and Gordon, he's had such an incredible career, obviously with his association with the Beatles, working at Apple, and then becoming one of the most successful producers in music. He's got so many stories to tell, and if you've ever seen him live, you know, the VH1 TV show Storytellers, when you hear the word storytellers, Peter Asher was meant to be in a show like that. And
that's a good point. I'm surprised they haven't used him yet.
He has the gift for gab. He loves telling stories. He's never at a loss for words. And, you know, he's got so many stories to tell. And just imagine, just from the Beatle years, the Peter and Gordon stuff, working at Apple, the relationship that he had, especially with Paul. You know, there's so many stories that he could tell us. So I'm very happy for him. That show in particular, I would look forward to quite a lot. I haven't listened to the channel yet, although it is being offered for free for a little while longer until May the 30th on their website. But good luck with the channel.
It is, by the way, I should mention to anyone that was wondering, because I had somebody ask me again today, it is permanent. It is not one of those temporary celebration type channels that they do every so often where they start a channel, to promote an album or something. This is not one of those. This is permanent. So, Alan, you got a comment?
Yeah, I've spent a few hours listening to it, and obviously I haven't heard any of the shows that are being done specifically for it yet, which I guess really are going to be the heart of it. Certainly for people like us who have all the stuff, all the recordings, it's these shows that are going to be the thing to listen to. What I have heard so far is, just turning it on in the middle of the day for a couple of hours, and they're playing Beatles tracks, which is, what you would expect, and solo tracks and covers. And it's all great, but, they didn't, in the time I listened, they didn't play anything, including the covers that I don't have on a playlist on my computer. So I could easily put it on mine on shuffle and have it do the same thing without the interruptions of people saying, that was things we said today from A Hard Day's Night, because I kind of already know that, and listening to other than that, listening to the promos, like Peter Asher's promo, have been the most interesting parts of it. Been a lot of solo music. What I've heard, it's really been predominantly Paul solo music. I heard a couple of John Lennon tracks. I heard maybe one or two George Harrison tracks and a couple of Ringo tracks, but so far it's been predominantly the Beatles as a group and Paul, which I suppose isn't surprising because he has the biggest catalog. So if they're programmed by shuffle as well, it's going to come up that way. And otherwise, I mean, there was a funny note on Facebook when someone noted that they introduced the Dirty Mac band from the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus as being, influenced by the Beatles. Okay, Yeah. So was Wings, I guess. And the All Star Band. But,
I saw that. That was kind of interesting. I mean, that would probably rank as maybe the rarest track that they've played. Of the ones I've heard. I didn't hear that. I did see the note, but I mean, most of the stuff they've played so far that I've seen has not been all that rare.
Yeah, and they've for the early albums, it sounded to me like they're using the '87 CDs because the early tracks are only the mono mixes.
Oh, really? They are using the
new Pepper.
They're using the new Pepper mix. Yes, they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that for people who don't have that and want to hear it, it's nice that they are doing that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think probably to be successful at doing this, you have to try to appeal to both mainstream fans and also hardcore fans.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
For someone like myself, whenever I program a Beatles show and I play solo cuts that you will not hear on the radio normally, even on a lot of Beatles shows, I'm thrilled to do that. And there are listeners of mine that love to hear that kind of stuff. For those people, that's going deep.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not for us, maybe not for fans that want to hear alternate takes and bootlegs and stuff like that. But there's all different levels of Beatle fans out there, and there's nothing wrong with playing some of the typical stuff and mixing that with, deeper tracks and B-sides and rarities.
I mean, and I should say that despite, what I said about the playlist and everything, I mean, it was enjoyable to listen to for the few hours that I did it over a couple of days, I mean, what can be bad? You're hearing a lot of Beatles stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and they haven't said anything about this, whether Paul or Ringo will, or any of the Beatle family will be involved as far as appearing on that channel, maybe live doing special shows. I mean, it'd be interesting to see maybe Sean come on and do an interview. It'd be, Julian would be especially interesting, I think, and of course Paul and Ringo would be, and Olivia. I mean, it'd be great if or Danny. It'd be great if they all showed up on the channel once in a while. Maybe they will.
I wouldn't be surprised if, given the fact that they, they've done little endorsements for it, little commercials, spots that you hear in between songs and everything. That if this channel has in effect most favored nation status, I wouldn't be surprised if they made themselves available to it now and then, if they have something to talk about.
Right.
And I would hope that maybe the channel would also play their music, the Sons' music. Any family members, that would give them more of a reason to go on the channel.
That's interesting. That's interesting because so far, from what what little time I've spent listening, they have not. At least I have. Have you guys heard anything?
I haven't, but you know what I have heard that is not quite the Beatles and not quite a cover is they've played some original versions of the 50s things that the Beatles covered. Mm-hmm. Little Eva, that kind of thing. Get your hands off my baby. Take your hands off my baby. Get your hands off my baby.
Keep your hands.
Keep your hands off my baby.
They did. Yeah. They've also played Jailhouse Rock.
Right.
Which I thought was very interesting. That was something I heard, I think, the first day. It was like, oh, okay. Play us the Beatle version of that, please.
Yeah.
But there's, they've been doing Elvis. They've been doing, I think I heard Please Don't Ever Change one day by the Everlys. So, they've been playing, they have been going deep into the catalog there, for the influences, which is kind of interesting. So
that's great. I do that on my show too, and I think that's an important part of their history is understanding the artists that influenced them, especially if they're songs that the Beatles covered, either as a group or in their solo careers. So I love that stuff. But then I wouldn't just play any Elvis Presley song. It really should be a song that they covered. Or at least one that they used to do live.
Well, yeah, and that would be without looking up Mark Lewison's Beatles Live, that would be the assumption with Jailhouse Rock, that in fact, at one point maybe in Hamburg they did do it, So. And
then how far do you take that? Do you also play the artists that were pre-rock and roll that Ringo covered on Sentimental Journey, or Paul is on the bottom? You could do that too.
Sure, and there is a set that I saw a few years ago that had that kind of stuff. The influences, Beatles influences, and I mean it went pretty deep. And so there's all sorts of places they could go. I don't think they would though, only because we're talking about a general audience. Whereas with something like with you do, it's a more focused audience, more hardcore that would understand it more. Where I think people, if you played, I can't think of anything. Maybe Peggy Lee. Well, not Till There Was You, but I mean, if you played Fever maybe or something, that they wouldn't realize, they wouldn't see the connection,
Yeah.
But.
Well, I always try to make a balance in my show between appealing to casual fans and hardcore fans, and I think probably Sirius is going to do the same thing. It certainly sounds like it.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. Yeah, I think the after show is kind of one link to that, and also two is possibly, and I haven't heard it yet, is the Chris Carter show, the Breakfast with the Beatles. So. But in any event, okay, onward and upward. The next thing is kind of a little weird. People who bought tickets for the McCartney tour in the U.S. got a strange email saying you were also getting a copy of the McCartney CD. Click here, and the whole thing came without warning. There was no announcement, not even on McCartney website. And when this happened, people started talking about it, a number of people asked me, is this real? And I said, I don't know. And I contacted McCartney's representatives, and it took several days to find out, yes, it is. So if you still have those links to the McCartney CD to getting it. If you order tickets, you can. It is safe to click onto. But it was really weird because it took an inordinate amount of time, and I really think that's something that should have been, out there right away, so people don't worry about that, because especially, with phishing and all that kind of stuff, that's so, and viruses and things, that's not something that, people should have had to question. Ken?
Well, from my perspective, I'm excited to hear this because it means, at least the way I interpret it, that Paul's new CD will be out, hopefully by the time that Paul comes to the U.S.
Well, it doesn't. They didn't tell you when you were going to get the CD, though.
No, it says when it becomes available, but
right.
It kind of makes sense that it would be out when he tours. So there's no guarantee of that. And, I knew it was for real because I got the email myself from Ticketmaster about it. And they asked for my mailing address. So, this is definitely happening. So, and also, I remember Prince did the same thing on one of his tours. He offered the CD with the ticket purchase. And I think sometimes maybe the artist might be doing this to help drive the sales and maybe to have a better chart showing,
Mm-hmm.
Don't know for a fact if that was the motivation behind this, but I think it's very smart to do that. I remember
I think you can probably go along with that. I think that, especially given what happened to him last time with the disappointing chart, situation with New, I think that's probably very likely. We were talking about before we started that if all these giveaways count as sales, then that's a good number right there, and then count up all the sales on top of it that will happen to the general public once it goes out into the stores. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you would call New disappointing in sales because it did chart as high as number 3 on the album charts. But I remember at the time when we were doing our show together, just you and me, Steve, I was talking about the fact that if everybody who went to see Paul live at that time had bought the CD, he probably would have had a number 1 CD.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of people that go to see Paul live who are young fans, don't really know his solo stuff, might only know his Beatles and a few select classic solo tunes, who might not think about buying his new CD. And now they get it with the ticket, which is a great idea. So it will give them reason to check out the music if they probably weren't thinking about getting it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'll see where that goes.
It would be great if they got the CD before the concert, so they could become familiar with the songs. So
Right. Well, we'll see what happens. We don't know when the album is coming out, and the first U.S. show is, I believe, early in July.
Mm-hmm.
So it's July 7th in Miami. So we will see.
Do you imagine it will be out by then? Wouldn't we have heard?
You would.
And would he put it that close to this Pepper release?
That's a good point. And given today, we're taping this on May 22nd, and there's been no word, and that's only a month and a half. So
the most recent reports I heard was that he was halfway done with the album.
In which case, it will not be out by the time the tour starts.
Mm-hmm. If that's accurate, if those reports are accurate.
Right.
But he does have the month of June when he's not booked, and he's got the month of August when he's not booked for any live shows. So I would think if he hasn't finished the album, he'd probably finish it up in those months.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see. But it's an interesting experiment for him. Alan, you were mentioning earlier when we were talking before the show that Dylan has done it too.
Yeah, Dylan did it with his tour last summer, and the album came, as I recall, way after the tour. I mean, it wasn't. It certainly wasn't before the show, if I recall correctly, and I think it was a bit after. So it was just sort of a nice little blandishment, that you bought the concert ticket and got the album too. I thought it was a nice touch.
Was it a CD or a download?
It was a CD.
Okay. because this has never happened to me. I don't go to that many shows, so. But okay, interesting. Okay, well we'll see how that happens. Next on the list, last week was the reissue. I guess you could call it reissue of the Bayonets Crash Boom Bang album with 2 added tracks. And Ken, you and I both talked to Brian Ray in advance of the release. And I mean, anyone who's heard the album knows that they're basically a down-to-earth rock and roll band. They have a lot of influences in basic rock and roll, including the Beatles, but Elvis and Aerosmith, and the Kinks, and there's a lot of influences there. And Brian was very excited about this. What happened was that Marty Scott, who runs Gem Records, got interested in the album and approached Brian about reissuing the album, and he asked him to record 2 new tracks, which they did, and they put them on the album. And the album, I mean, I liked the album before. I like it even more now. It's a lot of fun to listen to. So
yeah.
If you haven't heard the album, I think there's some stuff online on YouTube, but it's really a fun album to listen to, and I don't say that very lightly. It really, really is. It really is a fun album. Ken, what do you want to say?
Well, I think the album is just a great mix of strong rock and roll and a strong R&B feel. And I know that I said to Brian that when I listened to this album, it reminds me of Aerosmith a bit. And Steven Tyler, by the way, is on one song.
Right. I was going to mention that. Go ahead.
And also kind of like a more polished 70s Jay Giles feel.
Really?
So that's how I kind of, some of the songs are like that. All the songs have great hooks, and it's really difficult for me to pick a favorite. But, I programmed 2 of the songs from the Bayonets album on my syndicated show for Every Little Thing, and Crash Boom Bang, the title track, was one of them. And the guitar riff in there sounds like it could have been from Dirty Water, from the Standells, but Brian said to me it's closer to Everybody Needs Somebody to Love, which the Rolling Stones covered.
Right.
So I could see that now. But when I first heard that, it's like, oh, this sounds like Dirty Water to me. But the second song on the album is Killer. It's called So Easy Rider, which reminds me a lot of like Deep Purple, Space Truckin'.
Okay.
So, I mean, all the songs really have a lot of edge to them, a lot of hooks. It's just good, fun rock and roll. And every song is solid, And he also wrote songs with Oliver Lieber, who is the son of Jerry Lieber, of Mike Stoller and Jerry Lieber fame. And the 2 of them, have written a number of songs together on the album, and they really are very catchy songs and very accessible for rock radio.
And that's where the group came together. It was basically, according to what Brian told me, it was basically Oliver's idea, because I think Brian had another solo album in the works, and Oliver said, "Why don't we do a group?" And they did, and they got Lucretia, who the woman who plays guitar, as the 3rd member, and they took off. And it really is a great album. It really is.
Yeah, she's from Argentina.
Right, and Brian knew her from when he toured South America, because he did that solo tour of South America. One thing that they point up in the press release a lot is that it's gotten a lot of good response from Steve Van Zat's Underground Garage. It's been, I guess, a couple of songs have been named coolest songs, but I mean, I mean, all that aside, it's just a great album. It really is. It's a rockin' good album. It's one of these, put down the top on your car, turn up the volume, and take off albums. It really is.
It's great for the car. It is.
the last news item we have here is this Friday is the premiere of the new Pirates of the Caribbean album, Dead Men Tell No Tales. And as Paul McCartney made it well known last week and was known actually before this, he has a cameo in it, I guess as a jailer. At least that's what the picture looks like. And that's what I've heard some people say, although I have not seen the picture. However, on my recent trip to Disneyland, they had a 14-minute preview of the film playing in California Adventure, and I guess it's still there if you're in the area. But Paul is not in the preview, but the preview is in 3D, and it looks wonderful, I have to say. I know that the last couple of movies were not the best. They were kind of a little boring, but the preview on this one looked really good. And it's another one of those things where something rolls through the street, and Johnny Depp is on top of it again. But it was fun. It was fun to watch. In fact, I sat through it 4 times. Well, because it was free and because it was easy to get into, as opposed to the long lines to all the rides in Disneyland. But I'm just saying that at least from the 14-minute preview, and I assume again it was the beginning of the film, it looks like it's going to be fun. So there we go.
Okay.
We're now going to talk about what we came to talk about, and that's the Sgt. Pepper box set, which we've been all digging our teeth into. And I guess the first thing to talk about is the mix. And I like the mix. I thought it's very clean. I've heard some people say they thought it was kind of muddy. I didn't think so at all. Mm. I thought the songs sounded really good. I love the one thing that, of course, really caught my ear after Alan mentioned it a couple of weeks ago was the difference in Lucy in the Sky, which is beautiful. I mean, it really, when you hear that for the first time, you just kind of go, wow, because it is so different. But gentlemen, why don't you go ahead and Alan, I'm going to let you start this time. What do you think? I know you did a big piece for the Wall Street Journal.
Right, yeah. And I just today pretty much finished up a bigger piece for Beatle Fan with very little overlap, actually. Yeah, I generally speaking really like the new mix. It's, we've talked about the whole thing with people seem to be still confused about it, but how can you go back to the individual tracks if they only had 4-track? And then, EMI had saved all of the reels of tape, from before the reduction mixes were done. In 67, they did the reduction mixes so that they could free up more tracks to add extra instruments. And once those reduction mixes were done, George Martin was basically stuck with that reduction mix as part of, what he could manipulate in making particularly a stereo image. I mean, in mono, it doesn't matter that much because even if you've got this pre-mixed section, you're mixing the other new additions and the pre-mix section to mono. Things don't have to be put in different places. But now, having those things untangled and all those original recordings as separate tracks rather than as bounced down and mixed together tracks gave Giles an awful lot of freedom that his father didn't have in making the stereo mix. And it also gave him really better quality tracks to work with because all those bounce down tracks were copied and then copied again, and each time you lose a little quality. So we're starting off with like really clean raw materials. And, that in itself is like, I think I said this when the One Plus album came out, that itself is a good reason to remix all this stuff now, because you can now do things that you couldn't do in 67 because of the reduction mixes. In addition, he gave a lot more energy to the bass and drums. I mean, there are aspects of the sort of lower end of this recording that you don't even hear on the original, but obviously they were playing, and if you go back to the original and really kind of listen closely, the stuff's there. But
Right.
now it's really got a lot of energy. I felt that that did make it a little heavier sounding than the original. And there were a couple of places where that took a slight toll, I think. I think between that and the compression used on the vocal tracks, I thought the vocal tracks lost some suppleness that they had in the original mono and stereo mixes. But on the CD version of this, if you compare the old mono or stereo, and you might as well do the mono since it's at least in the same key as the new one. If you compare the old version and new version of She's Leaving Home, Paul sounds on the old one like he's singing a very kind of supple vocal line, whereas that's squeezed a bit out of it on the CD version of the new mix. I did listen to the LP of the new mix, which to me sounded warmer and fuller, and as if and the vocal compression didn't seem to be as much of a problem. It sounded to me a lot more like the old vocal sound. So who knows what the problem there is, whether it's the compression used for the CD was different than for the LP. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I generally like the mix. There are some interesting differences too in Within You, Without You. At the end of the instrumental solo, the sort of Indian back and forth that goes on for a while, there's Harrison is playing sitar on that, and he plays this little sitar lick at the very end of the solo section that on the 1967 mono and stereo mixes is really kind of buried. You can hear it if you look for it, but it's not, it doesn't stand out. Now it stands out, and I like it. It's a really nice little touch. Now you could argue that that's a compositional decision, and that if George wanted it lower in the mix, it should be lower in the mix. I don't know. I like hearing it. It's he played it, and it works. And the other thing like that is the final chord of A Day in the Life. It comes on, to me, I don't know, your mileage may differ, but to me it sounds much louder when it comes crashing in than it did on the 1967 mixes. And so it's kind of
Really?
it's kind of more dramatic. You hear the orchestral buildup, and then the piano chord crash is actually louder than the orchestra was.
I'm gonna have to listen to that again because the impression I got was a little different. I thought it fit in better, but I'm gonna have to. I'll have to listen to that again.
Yeah, listen again
on that basis. But okay, Ken, what do you think?
Well, I'm making notes of everything that you're saying here, Alan, so that when I go back and listen, I want to listen specifically for what you're bringing up here. But
I had a couple of weeks longer than you, so
yes, you did. But pretty much a lot of what I said when I went to the listening party for this still holds about the clarity of everything. And I've listened to the stereo remix on my little computer speakers. I've listened in the car. I've listened with headphones on, and I can pretty much say that, almost the same thing, that the clarity is astounding throughout. The one thing I did notice, and this also comes from many years of listening to the stereo mix and not really spending as much time as you probably think I should have with the original mono, but I noticed a lot more harmonies, especially on the title track and with a little help from my friends coming through my headphones. I don't know if you guys felt that. I heard more detail in picking out John, Paul, and George there in the harmonies. Did you guys hear that?
No, I mean, like I said, Lucy in the Sky here, with that background, did seem a little more harmonic than before, but I didn't notice it on the others. But
well, in particular, the first two songs, I noticed that on. Within You, Without You blows me away.
Mm-hmm.
Not just the clarity, but it's just so clean. I mean, you hear everything on that song. And in particular, with the headphones on, I know I brought up the drums in Lovely Rita. When the song kicks in, the first note on the drums there is just so powerful. You never heard it that way before. The bass and the drums really benefit from the new mix, and many people have said that, and it's very evident. I hear a lot more bass in certain songs. But, overall, I'm just very impressed with the clarity of it all. That's what I've noticed. And just knowing, like you said, the way that this whole thing was done by using the original tracks, not having to do all the reduction mixes, makes a big difference. Because I always remember when the 87 CDs came out that Sgt. Pepper sounded a little too hissy already. It didn't sound that powerful listening to the CD in 87. Of course, a lot has changed since then with the 2009 remasters. But, that's basically what I've come across feeling from the new remix. I'm very impressed by the whole thing. But I also need to go back and listen to the original mono to fully understand, whether this is an improvement. There are certain songs, by the way, like Good Morning, really hits you in your face. There's just so much sound coming at you all at once. So I don't know if that benefits from the new stereo mix or if it's better in the original mono. But, I noticed that with certain songs where there's a lot of sound coming from different sources, and even maybe to some degree being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. But for the most part, it's very clear, and I love the clarity and the brightness of it. Like, it's just, when you can single out all the different instrumentation and you can hear it so clearly, that's what makes it all the more worthwhile.
Yeah.
Did the two of you feel that way about those two songs that I just brought up? Because Good Morning is really, it's very loud.
Yeah.
All
That may have been a little too loud. I think that may have been one that was a little too loud. I mean, the ones that stuck out for me were Fixing a Hole and She's Leaving Home. And especially She's Leaving Home, especially after listening to the outtakes. I don't want to get too far ahead, but the outtakes on She's Leaving Home are tremendous. I mean, that with the violins and everything. Oh my God, that's like a religious experience. That was beautiful. But it's things like that. The outtake, with a little help is great. Getting Better has always been one of my favorite songs of my favorite Beatles song, period. Especially with Paul's what Paul does with the bass there, and listening to that was it was beautiful. It was fantastic. So, and it was interesting. I talked to Giles Martin, and we're going to try and include some of that in this two-part show. But it was interesting hearing him talk about what how they work things, and saying, for example, on with a little help from my friends, how when they were trying to move Ringo's voice around, if you moved it to the right, it didn't sound great, and it sounded better in the center. That was kind of interesting. So they did a lot of experimentation in this, and for the most part, it sounds pretty good, I think.
Yeah, that's another thing. I've never been a big fan of lead vocals in one channel. I think it kind of weakens the song, and so when the vocals are centered, I think it's much more powerful. And so they made adjustments in the mix with the new stereo remix, and I think it sounds much better that way.
And there have been comments on Facebook from some people about why bother, and it should be pointed out, and it's been said, all the way through since this thing was announced, that this is not replacing the original 2009 remaster mix.
Right.
And there was something that you brought up, Ken. I'd like to have us all talk about this as to whether this in any way takes away from the original mix. And Ken, since you brought it up first, I'm going to let you have at it first. What do you think?
Doesn't take away at all. I can apply this not just to Sgt. Pepper, but anything else that's come out in the past, like Let It Be Naked or the Love CD or whatever. It's just another way of listening to the music. And as long as you always have the original recordings that are available, as long as they're not removed from the catalog, to me that's revisionism. You know, if you remove that from the catalog and you only have the new mixes available, you're forcing people to accept it a certain way. This is just another way of listening to it. And if anything, for people who have been craving anything outside of those versions that we've come to know and love from the entire Beatle catalog, who want to hear something different, who want to hear how a song evolved, you know, and maybe some instrumentation in particular, and it really applies to Sgt. Pepper here, instrumentation that got buried in the mix. Here, you can hear so much more that you never heard before. In particular, even though we're jumping a bit here, but there's a particular outtake of Getting Better where you hear the tambura, which is, you know, an instrument that I knew was in the song, and I knew that there's a couple of bars before the last verse of Getting Better where you hear that drone from the tambura. But when you listen to this mix, this other mix, it's throughout the entire song.
Right.
And I never knew that before.
Yeah.
So,
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. That was pretty cool to hear that.
Yeah, so it's I think that for people who want to study this stuff, who really want to know after all these years, how do the Beatles do all this? This is, you know, a way of learning that. You know, we're not getting every take of every song. I'm sure there are some people amongst us that would like to have every single take.
Me.
But, you know, but these are, I guess, the essential ones, you know, and I don't think this takes away at all. You don't lose anything from the originals, you know, as long as they're always out there, there's no harm done.
Which does bring up an interesting point about not having everything. I did look at the track list of the, I believe is it the Darth disc? The 6-disc deluxe? Is that a Darth disc? Or that's Purple Chick, I'm sorry.
Purple Chick, yeah.
I'm sorry, Alan, talking bootlegs on this show. There have been projects out there of bootlegs that have done, you know, have gathered as many outtakes of Sgt. Pepper as they could possibly find, and the Beatles have dug up stuff that you know, that we haven't heard before. And the one interesting thing about the outtakes too is, although a lot of it's available for in stereo, not all of them were, and in this case, you know, I think most of them are. So
I think actually most of the outtakes we have not heard before. I mean, the things that are on Anthology, those are sort of Frankenstein versions of multiple takes, and so we've heard of, you know, a bit of some of the takes here, but not the whole thing because it was edited onto a different take, or a vocal was flown in, or an instrumental line was flown in. On the Anthology, I mean, I think that had a different purpose. I think the idea was to sort of give us an impression of how the songs developed in the studio, and to give us a really completely listenable and playable on the radio outtake. Whereas with these, they gave us the actual outtakes without messing about, complete with talking before and after in a lot of cases. And really no editing or flying in or making what bootleg collectors call outfakes. And they say that, you know, partly pejoratively and partly not, because a lot of people like outfakes. You know, a lot of interesting creative stuff can be done with outfakes. But nevertheless, you know, from Apple, who has access to the whole recorded catalog of sessions, we kind of want to hear the real thing. And so even where there were examples of things that were more or less complete on Anthology, I'm thinking of Strawberry Fields Forever Take 1, for instance. This is a completely different mix. On Strawberry Fields Take 1 on Anthology, George Martin left out the harmony vocals on the last verse, which I've always really loved. I mean, always since they first leaked out after the 1983 Abbey Road show where they were played and someone snuck out a recording of that. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that sounded just gorgeous, and he didn't include it on Anthology, possibly because it was an overdub and he was presenting the take pre-overdub. You know, that could be the reasoning there. but I think having it in there is a big improvement. And I kind of like the mixes of the outtakes. I think they're really revealing. Lucy in the Sky, take one, that chorus, the vocals are on there until the chorus, each time the chorus comes up, and then it's just instrumental. And to me, that sounds like a classic 60s garage band, with the organ and everything prominent. It just sounds like, like a garage band. It was just the last thing I'd have imagined Lucy could sound like. Now when I listen to the finished track, I hear it back there. But, you usually focus more on those vocals during the chorus, right? And let's see what else. I mean, Within You Without You.
Fixing a hole where he goes tailing off at the end. Fixing a hole. I thought that was very different.
There's a lot of stuff that I think it's similar to what I said when we were talking about the Paul and Elvis demos, where you hear Paul trying out different approaches in the studio while doing, making his way towards the finished version. With Fixing a Hole, you hear a lot of that. You hear a lot of phrasing that he eventually decided not to do, but some of which was really interesting. Within You Without You, you hear George talking to the Indian musicians about what he wants. I mean, that's really kind of revealing.
That's one of the most fascinating parts of this whole collection to me, because he's singing the parts to them.
Yeah.
And he's actually singing it. It sounds like these are Indian words.
Well, it's probably an Indian solfege system, the way we would say do, re, mi. He's using the Indian equivalents.
Oh, okay. Huh. I hadn't realized that. But I found that really interesting. It kind of reminded me of, on Wonderwall Music, they had a bonus track when it was remastered recently, George instructing the Indian musicians on the inner light.
Right. Yeah. And that was just in plain English, right? I mean, that is cool. Yeah.
And how did you like hearing Within You Without You with just the Indian instruments?
I like that. I thought that was good.
That was out before, though, wasn't it?
No. On Anthology, it was both the Indian instruments and the Western instruments.
Is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah, it just didn't have the vocal.
Okay.
So that gives us yet another perspective of Within You Without You, so we've now got...
Yeah. You were talking about Fixing a Hole. That particular take, which was take 3, you hear Paul playing the harpsichord in the middle.
Right.
He's doing like a solo part. So I found that to be interesting. Lovely Rita. Sometimes when you have a song and there's one part missing, it makes a big difference. And sometimes it gives it more of a live feel. Like with Fixing a Hole, take 1 is without the lead guitar. And there's no reverb on Paul's voice. It's very dry. So just without having the lead guitar, it gives it a different feel. And Lovely Rita didn't have harmonies on it, no bass, no piano solo on there. And you hear George Martin's piano playing near at the end of the song. So it actually, it feels more live. It's a more raw take, and it's exciting that way. It's incredible how you just remove one instrument, or even just a few, and it makes a huge difference.
Getting back to what we were saying, what we were originally talking about, though, Alan, do you feel the reworking of the album takes away from the original at all?
No, because as Ken said, the original's still there. You can always go to the original if you want it. This is just another version that you can hear if you want that. And I don't know, I imagine I'll be switching through all 3 of them when I feel like listening, pretty much the same way as I've always switched between mono and stereo. Yeah, I mean,
my feeling is, I don't know that I would want this done with every album, but we're not talking about every album.
I'd want it done with every album.
Well, I'm not talking about every. I'm talking about every album, period, not just every Beatle album.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there's a whole lot of albums I don't care about. And I don't...
Right. But in this particular case, with a Beatle album that especially is as iconic as this one, you learn a lot by by listening to this. So
yeah, here's the thing. I mean, sometimes you get to a point where technology allows you to do stuff that you couldn't have done at the time that you might have wanted to do at the time, and I think that it's not a bad thing to take advantage of that technology. It's not as if you're saying, well, the technology allows us to add disco beats and, make these into dance tracks. They're basically making the Sgt. Pepper album as we knew it and loved it, but with the kind of clarity that you could get if you were doing it now, and the kind of bass and drum power that you could get if you were doing it now. I mean, we know from Paul and Paul's complaints in particular, but all of them complained at various times over the years in interviews that they wanted more bass. They'd always bring in these Motown records and say, why can't you do that? And EMI would always say, well, we don't want people's record players skipping, so we have to attenuate the bass a bit. And it was always less than they wanted. So now, we know what they wanted. We know that what you're getting now. I don't really see a problem with it.
Yeah. I was just going to make one quick comment, and then I'll let you, Ken. I was going to say, it would have been interesting if one of them had suggested, God, I wish we could throw it, pull everything apart and play around with this a little more to, the way they did back then. That would have been very, very interesting. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the question that you're asking here, Steve, actually stems from a post that Elliot Easton put on Facebook. Elliot Easton, the guitarist in the Cars, who is a huge Beatle fan, by the way. But I just want to read what he wrote here, and it's interesting because this resulted in a long thread on my Facebook page. He wrote, "Is anyone else tiring of the unending refurbishing of the Beatles catalog? Personally, I feel that the mixing of an album is part of the performance in a studio setting, and being in the moment, just carrying on from having recorded, is the purest distillation of what was captured on tape. Remixing it 50 years later, repackaging with outtakes, never intended for release, I feel that it diminishes the purity of the final product. I can't imagine a better sound than the original mono mix of Pepper's. There isn't one." And that's why we're bringing up this subject. But, actually one of my Facebook friends responded very well by saying that if the Beatles had 16 tracks to work with in 1967, they probably would have done what Giles Martin just did. So they used what they had at the time to the best of their ability, and now we're just doing the same thing with those recordings.
It's interesting that a musician brought that up because, if somebody had said, if somebody came to the Cars and said, we want to take one of your albums and do a complete remixing, would he object to that?
Apparently.
Yeah, apparently he would. And that's too bad because it would have been, the Cars, not to get, start talking about the Cars a lot, but they had a great sound. And one of their, a remix on one of their albums, especially now, from what are we talking, 20 years?
Oh, more than that. It's late 70s through the mid 80s.
Yeah. Right. So, a remix on one of their albums might be to their advantage, and it's interesting that he doesn't particularly think so. So,
well, whatever.
Recording is always full of compromises. It just is, and you are always, even, now people feel limited by what you can do, and you can do almost anything now. And I'm also surprised that a musician wouldn't be interested in going back and saying, let me see if I can get closer to what my vision for this album was. And, let's not forget that Paul and Ringo have approved this mix.
Right, and that's one thing that Giles mentioned to me, because I asked him specifically, I said, how'd they feel about it? And he said, if they didn't approve it, it wouldn't be out.
Yeah. So
that's, you can take that for whatever it is. But yeah, if they didn't approve it, it wouldn't be out. So
of course, you can always make the argument that part of the appeal and why we are fascinated with the Beatles is because of the mystery of it all, how they achieve what they did. The more that gets stripped away, then maybe, it kind of ruins things in a way. Not for
Yeah,
me,
but it doesn't
but some
really.
some people may feel that way.
Well, I think I think you can get carried away a little bit, and to not to put down the bootleggers, but I mean, with some of the stuff that comes out on bootleg, I mean, I don't even pay attention to it all because you can get crazy picking out or taking things apart, and they've done that, and in some cases it's worked out very nicely, as I think I mentioned, or as probably some of our listeners know, this putting a mono mix in stereo has been done by the bootleggers. This is not something brand new. But the fact that the Beatles did it, the fact that they have authorized this, the fact that they've gone back to the original source material and done it is a monumental thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I, in fact, I don't know of any, and Alan, maybe you can help me out. I don't know of any artist that has done anything like this. I can't think of one.
Well, other artists have allowed people to come in and mix their stuff. I mean, a lot of progressive rock bands are getting Steve Wilson in particular to redo their catalog. I mean, Jethro Tull, several albums. Yes, several albums.
I'm talking about going back to the mono mix like they did, like the Beatles did here.
Well,
they
went back to the multi-track masters and kept the mono characteristics in mind, but it's not like they took the mono mix and did anything to it. What the bootlegs you're talking about, we're talking about taking a mono mix and using, various EQ and computer technology to kind of strip things out so that you can place them in a different part of the image. But that's different than actually having the multi-track tapes and
right. Oh yeah, obviously,
doing it.
Yeah, obviously.
So I don't know if any.
And that's why this is significant because of that very reason. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if any other bands who've said, we preferred the mono mix and now we're going to make a stereo mix of the mono mix, like that. I can't think of any who've done it, but who would it be actually? There are a lot of people. If you collect an artist, and it's an artist from that long ago where they were putting out things in mono and stereo, you often get fascinated by the different mixes. I mean, I've read articles about Bowie's different mixes, and, the Stones have some, and, but I haven't seen anyone go back. But I also haven't seen anyone arguing that, the mono is the superior mix, and therefore we want to incorporate those characteristics into a new stereo mix, which is what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we could talk about the mono versus stereo Rolling Stones. The one really good example of that is Satisfaction. Oh. The stereo mix is horrible.
I agree.
I mean, absolutely disgusting.
I like it.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think that I normally love stereo mixes, but I can't listen to that one.
Really?
Especially with the guitar, the way the guitar, where I guess that's Keith's guitar comes in there. I mean, it's hard. I think that's terrible.
Yeah, but you can hear some things that you can't hear in the mono mix, so it's interesting.
I agree with that. You can, but I think the sound overall of that mix is just horrible.
I agree with you, Steve. And you can't hear the vocals. It's more like.
Right, and that's
it's like karaoke. It's like
and that's why the mono mixes on the Stones. A lot of them. I mean, that's why that mono album box of the Stones albums that came out last year was fantastic, and it really is.
Yeah.
So, anyway, Alan, let's talk again about the vinyl version and the second disc with the outtakes. They're done. I set up an outtake version taken from the CDs, but you did it. But you've listened to the actual second disc that will be on the 2-disc CD set. And you want to talk about the differences there? Or
I have the LP version of what they call the deluxe edition, and we've been focusing on the super deluxe edition, which is the 6-disc set. And it's kind of interesting what they did, because on the 6-disc set, the 2 discs of outtakes are sequenced kind of chronologically according to, when the earliest recording date of a particular song is. So it starts with Strawberry Fields, and then you've got, in Penny Lane and When I'm 64 and A Day in the Life. It's sort of done in the order the sessions went, which is really interesting. If you follow, say, Mark Lewison's recording sessions book, and you're seeing the way the album, evolved as they were doing it, and then they resequenced it for the actual release. On the deluxe edition, the 2-disc set, of which I have just the vinyl version, I don't have the CD version, apart from the 3 tracks you can get from iTunes.
Which, we should mention for anybody listening to this before Friday, is that you can pick up 6 tracks total.
Yeah, 3 from the remix and 3 from disc 2. If you order the iTunes version, they'll give you those as advances. And disc 2, what they've done is they've sequenced it in the order of the album as it plays, rather than chronological order. So basically, it is an alternative Pepper on disc 2. And to me, the funny thing about it is that when I play it, I mean, they've chosen obviously just one track from one outtake from each song. And they end it with The Day in the Life with the vocal ohm final chord. But they use take 1 on the 6-disc set. They edit that chord onto take 2. So it's a slightly different edit there. That's no big deal. But what I found kind of interesting about the alternate Pepper thing is that, first of all, in a lot of cases, they're instrumentals. But they have the quality of a Let It Be bootleg, in the sense that, you're getting the chatter before and after the songs. You're getting very unfinished versions where they're sort of making their way towards the finished version. So it's as if it's a Let It Be bootleg, except it's all Pepper stuff, which to me actually is, having heard a great many Let It Be bootlegs, I found this a refreshing alternative to that, because to me it's better stuff.
I like that too. Okay.
I actually like the fact that you can listen both ways. You can listen in the sequence of the way that it was on the album on one disc, and you can listen in the way that they recorded it, which is fascinating to itself.
If you buy both versions.
Yeah, if you buy both versions, right. Ken, did you have something to say about this?
Oh, it's just a wonderful collection, all these outtakes. There's so many things that I found fascinating, not just the things that I mentioned already, but, for example, When I'm 64, the one outtake that's on, it's actually on disc 2, it actually plays at the normal speed, which is a little bit slower than the one that we're used to on the album. And we've heard all these many years that Paul, at least that's what's written in all the books, is that Paul wanted his vocals to be sped up a little bit so he would sound younger. Well, this is the way that it was recorded before it was adjusted to that. And there's a few songs on Sgt. Pepper where they played with the speed. Like, for example, She's Leaving Home, which up until recently I didn't know until Giles Martin said it. That's how Paul wanted it. So that's really the version. It's not like that was a mistake and the stereo version was the one that was the real version, the way it was supposed to go out. That's the way Paul wanted it. Also, I loved hearing just the backing tracks on Penny Lane with no bass, no drums. It's a different take, but it's just interesting to hear that. And what I really found fascinating was right after that they had vocal overdubs for Penny Lane. And, working out the harmonies on that song and hearing George sing his part. It's just really, fun to hear that. And also, adding hand claps and stuff like that to the song. Singing, actually hearing the backing tracks and singing along to them. And Paul is actually singing the trumpet part.
Right. That was really interesting. What was interesting about that is that we hear an awful lot from people who follow the Beatles peripherally, who have no problem giving their opinion that all the interesting stuff the Beatles did was George Martin. But you hear Paul singing the arrangement here, and I don't think he's singing what George taught him. I think he's singing what he wanted that part to be. So I thought that was really an interesting thing too, because we kind of know the debate about what George Martin did and didn't do. He did an awful lot, but it simply is not true to say that he did absolutely everything, even in the orchestral arrangements. Paul knew what he wanted, and George Martin has said so.
Right.
So that's a great moment of it. Paul singing that trumpet part, and some of the instrumental backing that's eventually going to be added. I thought that was great.
Yeah, not only that, but one of the takes of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, take 5 it was, you actually hear Paul at the very beginning giving John direction on how to sing it.
Right.
He wanted him to sing it quicker. It sounded more like a guide vocal, up until then. So just to hear that, where we're being witness here to the session and what went on there, which, up until now, these are private moments of what went on in the studio.
Right.
A Day in the Life is really interesting. Those 2 takes 1 and 2, no drums. Right. I mean, the drums are such a big part of that song. Some of Ringo's best drumming, you could say, is on A Day in the Life, but to hear it without the drums gives it a different feel altogether.
I wonder how many people are going to hear Sugar Plum Fairy for the first time.
Yeah. Also, those 2 backing tracks for She's Leaving Home are really wonderful, like you said, Steve. I mean, they're works of art just by themselves without hearing Paul singing, and they actually use the first take in there, but the other take is just gorgeous.
Yeah.
To hear the harp with the stringed instruments it's like, a classical piece of music by itself, standing by itself.
Yeah.
So, you realize when you've got a backing like that works without even having the vocals, that's something really special right there.
Yeah. Then there were some nice touches in that arrangement that you don't really hear when you listen to the full track because you're focusing on the vocals. But hearing them on their own, you hear some nice little turns going on, especially at the end. And, of course, there are those couple of bars of cello music in both of those outtakes that, in the end, they decided to cut out, little cello transitions. And it obviously went as far as the mixing, because where they give on disc 4 after the original mono mix, they have an early mix of She's Leaving Home, which still has those cello bars in it. So they must have actually just said, you know what, don't like that, taken a razor blade and cut them out.
Yeah.
So all these things tell us so much about how they worked. That's the great thing about it.
Yeah.
So
I wish they had apparently. Yeah. Really.
I love him. He's a big Beatle fan. And he's a big George Harrison fan. So.
Okay. Apparently, they used a needle drop on the Penny Lane promo. I wish they had found that tape somewhere.
Yeah, it's not as if it's unlistenable. It's just a little bit muddier than you hoped it would be.
Right.
But
this is what's really going to be interesting is how much it sells. If it goes to number 1 on the charts, which I suspect it will, given the advanced sales, because it's still, I believe, in the top 10 on Amazon in pre-sales. So this thing is going to, and that answers the, kind of gives a answer to the question of whether they'll do this again. Because if this makes as much money as it looks like it's going to, there's you don't have to bet no on this one. I think there's a good chance. I'll think we don't know what they're going to do. Obviously, but I think, it's a favorable. Things looking favorable that something will happen down the road.
Yeah, probably.
I hope so. And the impression that I got from Jeff Jones at that party for Sgt. Pepper was that they are listening to what the fans are saying. They are listening to social media. So I think the smart thing that Apple should do is mix having releases for mainstream fans and then mix that with the more hardcore fans.
Which
try to please both.
which is what they've been doing. Yeah, Giles basically told me that they were going to wait and see how this is received, and given the advanced sales, it's been received very well, especially the $150, or actually it's lower now. It's gone down, I think, to close to $120. $120 box set. And if that's the case, who knows what's going to happen down the road? I know, Alan, with that BBC interview, Giles made reference, or a lot of people took it as the White Album. You think he
said
definitely...
he said, quote, the White Album will be the next release, and he obviously dialed it back, and my theory is that he was told by Apple, listen, you can't say that yet, but he said will be. He didn't say, originally he was making it sound, and people were taking it as, okay. What he meant was that the White Album was the next release after Pepper.
And that's what he said the next day on Twitter. He said,
yes, that's what he said. But if you go back to the tape, he said, will be the next release. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose people can slip. We do it here all the time. But
no, we don't.
Yeah, well, keep your hands off my baby.
Yeah, there we go.
But yeah, right. But it sounded to me like he really was saying this will be the next release, and he just happened to have let it out, without thinking that he wasn't supposed to. And generally he's been really good in interviews about saying that we'll see how this sells, but I think we pretty much know that this is what they would like to do. I mean, it could be that they need the market validation of it selling well, but the fact is OnePlus was almost the beginning of this. I mean, they did experiment with it on Yellow Submarine Songtrack. Those were all remixes too.
Let It Be Naked.
And Let It Be Naked, yeah, so but with OnePlus especially, you got the feeling that, okay, we've got Giles Martin and Sam Okell, and this is the team that's going to do this. They're approximating the mono mixes, which made a great deal of sense for the singles. The new mixes sound good. People like them. Okay, we go do the next one. That's Pepper. I don't know if they're going to have to do it on a case-by-case basis, or whether they're going to just bite the bullet and say this is the most amazing catalog in the world and it deserves the kind of attention that we gave Pepper. All of it. Every single one.
You hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, I've slightly mixed feelings about the White Album coming next. I'll tell you why. Because I've been telling people that I have this deal with God where, I can't die until EMI releases the 27-minute Helter Skelter. And suddenly, that seemed like a really good deal when there was no possibility they were going to release that. I mean, it doesn't mean I have to die when it comes out, but it's just that's my shield, right? That's my protection. So, the fact that the White Album might be next and they might actually consider releasing the 27-minute Helter Skelter, this could be dangerous for me. So, I'm thinking.
And there's a lot there too. I mean, if you think about it, that's why I didn't even think about the 27-minute Helter Skelter when all that White Album stuff came out. The first thing I thought about was the Escher demos. That was the first.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had 5 or 6 of those on Anthology that were in stereo and were much better quality than we had heard before, which is from a cassette that Yoko had that she gave to Westwood One. It's several generations down. The sort of problem is that when they were putting together the anthology, George Harrison decided that he was going to determine which of those tracks got used, and he gave them to Apple and he said, "This is all I've got." But he had previously said in a 1987 interview with Musician that he had the whole thing and it would make a great unplugged album. So, I guess it depends on how he felt about things at a certain point. And at the time of Anthology, 8 years later, he wasn't feeling like he wanted the whole thing to come out, so he just gave them those tracks. So it's going to be up to whether Olivia and Danny feel better about giving Apple the whole set. But that obviously would be, disc one of the outtakes, I would think. And then there is so much has come out. I mean, there's like a whole disc of outtakes of Blackbird, right? That's been bootlegged already. And there's
trying to think about that. Trying to think of those. I can't think of them offhand, but I guess you're right.
So a bootleg called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, wasn't that?
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Had a lot of White Album stuff, and
there was the Revolution stuff,
right? And you got to figure that the way they included Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, they would probably include Hey Jude and Revolution, because it also gives them material for the accompanying video disc, which could have all of the Frost outtakes and the, what was actually shown on Frost. I mean, all those things are out. They're available on bootlegs.
Yeah.
So, including where the Beatles are counting in and play the David Frost theme, there were like 4 takes of that. And they're all different, So there's tons of stuff,
So now that we've figured out Apple's next release.
Yeah, they can just send us a check for a consultant.
Well, I think what they ought to do is just send me a copy of the 27-minute Helter Skelter, because I should probably have my lawyers look into this and see whether, if the terms of my deal with God was that EMI had to release the 27-minute Helter Skelter, and EMI doesn't actually exist as such anymore, and it would be universal, that might not actually fulfill the deal. I could live forever. Which is what it would take if you want to wait for all of the things that Apple should be putting out.
That's right. Oh, well. This has been crazy. Let's put it that way. We tried to be structured, and where did we go? But that's beside the point. I don't know what to say, except if you want to get a hold of the show, you can write to us at thingswesaidtoday at radioshow@gmail.com. We have a Facebook page, Things We Said Today, Beatles Radio Show. We have Twitter account, Things We Said Fab. We're on Podbean. The shows are on Podbean, on YouTube, and they are also on Google Play. There's a new one for you guys. So go to Google. You can check us out at Google Play. Alan, you have anything coming up you want to talk? Your story on Sgt. Pepper was in
I think it was Wall Street Journal Thursday the 18th, I think it was. And obviously it's still online. They have a paywall, but sometimes you can get through. And then I'll have, a longer version coming up in the next issue of Beatle Fan, which not sure quite when that comes out, I think in July. And that's I'm going to be actually on June 6th, going to be on a panel at the Paley Center in New York, talking about Sgt. Pepper and the Summer of Love. And the panel keeps changing a little, but so far the other panelists are Michelle Phillips from the Mamas and Papas, of course. It was going to be Al Cooper, but he dropped out because of health reasons, they said, and they're replacing him with, I can't figure out entirely the rationale, but I'll figure it out. It's Kenny Loggins, and D.A. Pennybaker, and Graham Nash is going to be the moderator of this panel. That's June 6th in New York at the Paley Center, and otherwise you can reach me at Alan Kozin on Facebook or Alan Kozin Remixed on Facebook.
And Ken?
You can reach me at my email address, everylittlething@att.net, plus my website, which is kenmichaelsradio.com. Just want to mention one thing here, because I think I mentioned this in the last show. I have a new page, which is called Important Links. And what I've done is, every time I see an interesting article on Facebook on the Beatles, then I just put the link on this one page on my website. So I've accumulated all these different articles on the Beatles, lots on Sgt. Pepper, lots on Flowers in the Dirt, lots on George Harrison's vinyl catalog, Julian Lennon's new children's book. And in fact, it's got the links there for Alan's article in the Wall Street Journal on Sgt. Pepper. It's got your article, Steve, in Variety about who the real Sgt. Pepper was, which we got from Bruce Spizer's book. And also your new article, Steve, from Billboard with the interview with Giles Martin. The link is all there. So it's just a very handy way if you want to do a lot of reading on the Beatles and you want to know some of the new articles that are out there. It's all on one page called Important Links. So check that out if you can. Plus, there's Beatles trivia every week. You can win Brian Ray's new CD with the Bayonets called Crash Boom Bang, as well as Flowers in the Dirt, the special edition, at kenmichaelsradio.com.
Okay, and you basically stole my promo, because I was going to say I had an interview with Giles Martin in Billboard, and I had the article on the identity of the real Sgt. Pepper in Variety. So you basically stolen everything I've done. I will say the one article that I really, if you did not see it, and it has nothing to do with the Beatles really, is the interview with Dion I did a few months ago for Billboard. That's probably one of my favorite articles at the moment. And if you have not seen it, it was before his album came out, but it's a great. It was really good to talk to him. So there we go. Anyway, I guess we'll just say goodbye for Ken Michaels and Alan Kozin. This is Steve Marinucci for Things We Said Today, saying thank you for listening. Be sure to catch us on Podbean, YouTube, Google Play, Facebook. We're all over the place, and we will see you next time.